welcome to today's talk. I'm very happy to welcome you to Marilyne Anderson. And Marilyne, thank you so much for being with me today. And would you like to introduce yourself just briefly?
With pleasure. So I'm Marilyne Anderson. I'm a professor at EPFL, an engineering school in Switzerland. I'm a physicist by training and did my PhD in more technical aspects, then went for a professorship at MIT, where I moved from technical aspects of daylighting research to more human aspects, and then developed my group back here at EPFL, working on different dimensions of daylight, from perceptual to comfort and to physiological aspects, which actually led me also to co-found a startup called Oculite Dynamics, where we bring these research outcomes into the practice of architecture and buildings. So it's a great pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. And your passion for daylight, where does that come from? How did you become so interested in daylight?
Yeah, so it was not, let's say, an a priori, but it turned out to be the topic closest to bringing together the worlds of physics and the world of architecture or art, or the more emotional side of things. And so I spent quite a while researching on daylight. After a while, I did ask myself whether I should change subject. And then I heard myself explaining what I was doing, and I thought, no, that sounds really interesting. And so I decided to stay.
And it is really interesting. Part of the, and I have studied philosophy, where I have read from the philosophical aspect, the way light meets the eye. And I was 18 and I didn't understand it. So when you studied physics, and you know amazing stuff about the natural science pertaining to light, why is it that light is so important to us in our daily lives, unbeknownst to many of us, including myself?
Well, the fact that you're asking me these questions is probably because you are aware of the importance of light. But I guess the simplest answer is because we evolved under it. So we have been living together with light all our human species life, and have developed our eyes according to it, which is also why light is such an important factor in getting our life to be synchronous with the outside world. And I guess because vision is one of our important senses, it also is revealed through light. So it's not possible to really distinguish our needs from those related to light, at least to a large extent.
And we've started, because this is a topic that is becoming more and more important also in when we're talking about architecture, because if we just look at the size of windows, etc., it has really changed through time, the size of windows. And a lot of people, such as yourself, of researchers, are beginning to be able to document the importance of daylight with regards to health. What is the connection? One thing is that the eye has developed our own development, but the clear correlation between daylight and health, what does that actually mean?
Well, it has many, many dimensions, of course, and the size of windows have also evolved due to climate or the necessities of energy used for comfort versus what was available, whether it was plenty of daylight, but also with too much heat versus not so much daylight, and maybe too much cold. And so all these have affected the size of windows. Overall, I mean, one of a tangible connection to health has been found out very recently, only 20 years ago, when we discovered that through our eyes, light is responsible for keeping us in a healthy physiological state beyond what we had imagined, not just because of what we see, because this is not related to seeing at all, but through this photoreceptor whose existence we didn't quite know. We knew we had cycles that were related to the day-night cycle, but we didn't know through which channel, through which pathway this was happening. And it is happening through the eye and through a novel photoreceptor. So this opened up actually a whole new area of research in which I dived into with other people in the world as a very exciting one, because then we can make a physiological connection between exposure to light, and daylight happens to have, not surprisingly, all the attributes of good light, and the non-surprise is due to the fact that we evolved under it, I guess. And so this opens up, new questions, and therefore also new, let's say, guidance on what we need and what is good for us.
Yeah, so when you say daylight is good light, what does good light mean?
So again, as a researcher, it would be wrong to try to answer in a single sentence. There are so many aspects of good light. I think it draws on different dimensions. Some are more perceptual, like about atmosphere, ambience, what we like to see. This would include also views out, or how an interior space is illuminated, or how an exterior space is illuminated, all of these aspects. Others are more related to comfort, like, do we feel comfortable in a lit space or outside? Do we experience glare? Is it to a point where it prevents us from doing what we do, or it's noticeable but not beyond that, and therefore we might still welcome it because it brings us light? So the comfort aspect is another dimension. One other dimension we just mentioned is health, so the physiological impact of light on health, and therefore all the biological consequences or response to it. A fourth dimension would be just what we need to do, functional light, I would say, so to perform our tasks in a way that without creating discomfort, without having anything particular about the ambience, and being, let's say, neutrally good in health, we still need certain amounts to perform certain tasks. And I hope there will always be the delight aspect of light, so the one that amazes us and surprises us, and this goes beyond formal ambience or atmosphere or really pure lighting design, or can connect to lighting design. It's really about the love for something lit and how it is lit. So maybe that makes altogether 5 dimensions, and we tried to bring 3 of them as a focus area for a startup we developed based on the research that we were developing.
So this kind of a really pivotal new insight in terms of the receptors in the eye pertaining to light, and you said it led to new questions. Were these questions just as you've just mentioned in terms of comfort and health, but are there some particular questions that you can remember that you immediately, quite curiously, wanted to ask when this new finding emerged of the importance of daylight and the eye?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to health, of course, the first scientists who started to deal with these questions were neuroscientists, and as people who also had a knowledge of the brain, or biologists, because they could make the connection and to try to see, what is the mechanism really by which light will influence us through our brain and through what pathway and so on. I came in a few years later, and therefore, as the fundamental aspects of things cannot be dealt much better than by neuroscientists who really know what they're talking about, my perspective was more, what does this mean to more regular life, like to daily life? So it's one thing to try to find fundamental aspects in a lab, and to when we undergo acute exposure to light for very small moments or very dim environment for very prolonged periods, things that we may not do in real life. This allows us to reveal the mechanism. So this is necessary. Where with my background and the type of work that we do in my group comes in is maybe to bring that closer to what this means for where we work, where we live, how we behave, how we commute, all of these aspects. So it's still about the mechanisms, but it's maybe the mechanism in a slightly less controlled environment and something that more closely resembles reality, which in research means that it's much more noisy. Like you have a lot of confounding factor, and so it's a pain to conduct, but it's very interesting and very enriching when you the act of trying to reveal something that would apply to real life is really satisfying.
Yeah, and it's also very fascinating in terms of just the positive impact it can have on human health when you alter or changes the aspects in which the human being can access daylight, for example, at home or at work. So it must be very satisfying to make these recommendations.
Yes, and it's satisfying, yes, but it's also double-edged sword because we tend to want to quickly jump into products or into things that will just solve it. And as researchers, we try to stay careful and stick to what we really know about. And so even though evidence seems to be accumulating that something resembling the day-night cycle offered by daylight, so abundant blue rich white light, especially in the morning, this contrast between the day and the night, trying to avoid as much as possible too strong light, especially if it contains blue, for the evening, etc., etc. So these seem to be consistently found over and over in the experiments. But then it's tempting to try to draw a shortcut and say, okay, so let's just buy a lamp that mimics, color of daylight, and we will be done. Our job will be to try to show scientifically how much we need to make a difference versus not make a difference. And if it doesn't make a difference, it doesn't mean that it's bad, but then maybe the placebo effect is dominant rather than the actual physiological effect of light. And so this is one, I wouldn't say frustration, but a danger, I would say, that we are constantly facing is to the well-being market being what it is, to try to grasp whatever we publish and turn it into something that would be a solution for everyone, whereas the problem is more complex than that.
Yes, because part of the complexity when you were also talking about the neuroscience is that daylight has a huge impact on our circadian rhythm, and also the exposure to the various types of lights that you just mentioned. It actually influences our hormonal production. So the health aspect is also, because it's so complicated and our body is so dependent on all of these various stimuli that we get during the day, it becomes, as you say, very tempting to just equate, as we've learned to do our 10,000 steps a day to get some activity into our body. People want these kind of very quick, easy fixes to something that is quite complex, as you're saying. However, with the knowledge that we have about the importance of daylight, and we bring it into the building and the environment, the lived environment, and architecture, what do you, given your research and the knowledge that you have accumulated over the last 20 years, what do you see as is really important to bring into the design phase as an architect? What would your recommendations be?
Absolutely, and this is actually precisely what we try to offer with the startup we created for that purpose, precisely, which was to bring the outcomes of the research, notably related to health, but also related to comfort and to perceptual aspects, into a design process. So to help architects make informed decisions about what it will mean to have a certain daylighting strategy when it comes to dimensions that are not necessarily integrated into the process, or were not integrated into the process. So it is true that we can give answers today. They can be summarized as super simple. The closest you are to living outdoors, the better off you will be. the questions is not so much that, so we know we need abundant light during the day, we need especially light in the morning to tell our bodies that this is the morning and we should stop producing melatonin, and now is the time to be alert as diurnal animals that we are. But it's then, as we have lifestyles that are much more indoorsy, that have a social life that is very bright in the evening, which it shouldn't be, all of these aspects of our lifestyles that go against how we evolved, which is under daylight, with very contrasted day versus night, with a definitely abundant light all the time and of the right spectrum. Then the question is, how low can you go? How little is still enough to be good for you? And these thresholds are more difficult to establish because they are dynamic in themselves. There is no one threshold that solves it, because actually what you have been exposed to before also matters on that threshold. So the life, if you have been on a camping trip for 1 week and the next day you come home and during the night you may have some blue light in your eye for some reason, it may have a much lower effect than if you have been working indoors in an open plan office away from the window for all that week. That same light at a given moment will have a different effect on you depending on what you had before. So this is what makes it very complicated, unlike visual studies, which are instantaneous, and that's what matters. We have to be more careful. So when we advise architects with the startup called Oculite Dynamics, the idea is to work on a day and seasonal and annual basis, knowing that, of course, people won't spend all their time on the whatever office that they are designing, but it's to talk about the potential of a given space to provide the necessary doses of access to daylight that at least offers hope that with the right behavior, you would have the right exposure. Yeah.
It's really, really interesting that you're able to document that not just are we different as people, but as our environments change, that really lingers on in the way we respond as individual human beings. The classic one size does not fit all goes in this context as well.
Absolutely. So yeah, it goes in this context on many levels. So we are different, and just for the light, we have what we call a chronotype. So that's like whether you are an early bird or a late owl, for example. So if you're more, when we say from the morning or from the evening, this is who we are, defines who we are. So we might experience changes during puberty and adolescence, where we tend to have our rhythms that shift toward the later. So anyone who has teenagers at home has realized that. My daughters have the benefit of having their mom being a researcher in that area, and that lets them sleep all the way through, because I know it's good for them. So the chronotype changes, and then sometimes, but not always, it changes back again, but oftentimes it does for the majority of people. So we experience these changes over our own lifetime. But in addition, and then we have different degrees of all that. But in addition, our own behavior, being the same person, depending on if you live an outdoorsy life or an indoors life, and even if it's indoors, depending on how dim or not dim, how contrasted it is, how brighter your evening social life is compared to your day life, all of these will affect or influence what light does to you. And I mean, we are all aware of the seasonal affective disorder. So the fact that winters are tough because we don't get our light dose in the morning. And this is really something that we need to get us started, so to speak, to actually synchronize our circadian rhythms that you were mentioning before, to set our biological clock right and not to be shifted. And when we don't get it, we get more tired, sometimes depressed, and it can have very negative consequences. So there is the seasonal, there is the personal, there is the behavioral, there is the physiological, so like how we are, our biology. So all of these matter in how light influences us. So that means we have an endless life of research ahead of us, which I guess is good.
That's a good thing. And when I sit in here, it's always very, very fascinating, because is the answer then to make sure that all buildings, that the people in within the buildings, for example, an office space, how do we then ensure that they get daylight? I also heard someone saying that that the research is documenting today that it has to be the authentic daylight, that we can't just produce the artificial light. Is not as good. It's good, but it's not as good. So it has to be the authentic daylight that people should be exposed to. So all of these aspects of daylight, we have health ascertained. Daylight has a huge impact on health. But we also know that the well-being is also connected to this green transition in terms of sustainability, that we have to start creating buildings within the planetary boundaries. So I was just wondering, if you were to, given all of your experience within researching in daylight and what you've seen of the sustainability agenda, do you see a close connection between the research documenting the what impacts well-being, and how does that then connect to the sustainability agenda?
Yeah, so there are several layers in this question, I would say. So first of all, I don't know if we have proven in any solid way that there is something intrinsic about the daylight radiation that is better for our well-being. I think the more logical, but this is maybe a personal take, is that because we evolved under it, it happens to have all the right attributes. Otherwise, our eye and brain would have evolved differently. So whether we can reproduce daylight in all the attributes that matter, spectrum, intensity, timing, distribution, all of those, I guess theoretically, it's not impossible. But going back to the sustainability question, it would probably cost a lot of energy, because to be as abundant as daylight with the right spectrum, like this perfect whiteness of daylight that has all this blue to which the melanopsin is responding to, melanopsin being the name of that photoreceptor that we have, the photopigment. So all these show that, yeah, you can try to mimic daylight, but knowing that we are indoors 100 times dimmer in the dimmer environment than outdoors, this is maybe matters much more than subtle questions about the type of photons we are getting. But so daylight basically is the right answer, and then you try to go close to it. Now, from a sustainability standpoint, of course, the social aspect or dimension of sustainability is very important, as well as the ecological or environmental and the economical. And if you, it would be more sustainable in the ecological sense not to build buildings. You use less energy, you use less carbon, you use less material, much better. Except that as a human species, we need shelter, and therefore the reason we build buildings is for us. And therefore, if we decide to build a building for us, we might as well try to make it comfortable for us. Otherwise, why build it in the first place? And then the sustainability question comes into how much energy you need to ensure these comfortable conditions versus, and this includes the carbon that you put in the construction itself, versus how much you can let go, or how your decision can be influenced by other factors to build your building. What is a bit frustrating is that there are certain behaviors or low-hanging fruits that are so simple, and yet even that is not done. So even when the building is built, people occupy it. It has blinds, which is good, because then you can protect from solar gains. And what you see is that the blinds are drawn down all day long, even though the problematic periods of the day, let's say on an east-facing window, so the problem appears in the morning, you have sun, you get the blinds down, that's okay, but then you leave them down the entire day, and then the next day you might not even get them up again if they're manual. This is so sad, because then you you prevent all these people from having access to daylight, which they should, just out of, I don't know if laziness or lack of information. But it's really sad that certain improvements don't need a lot of effort to be done and would already make a difference. And then there is the behavior of going outside enough to only allow office spaces that have a window. All of these aspects, of course, that come into play.
So these, if you were to kind of list these effortless actions that we could easily do apart from the blinds, what would these actions entail?
So I mean, so the blinds is definitely a number one because it's so easy to reach. The other is to design things with that knowledge in mind, and I guess this is where the Oculite mission it comes, is to try to make these informed decisions early on, whether it's for new build or for renovation, or to rethink, or if you cannot change much on an existing building and you don't want to destroy it because it has so much carbon embedded, you might change your behavior in it to use certain spaces at certain times or by certain people, and to try to induce a more healthy behavior rather than changing the construction itself. So I think the low-hanging fruits can be numerous, but for some reason, things like behavior, even though you cannot go much more low-tech than that, seems to be a very difficult thing to actually implement.
And do you think this is due to habits, or why do you think we know behavior always is actually a greater barrier for change than we assume, but still, as you're saying, low hanging fruits, if it's in an office space or another professional working environment, why is it so difficult for these low hanging fruits to be implemented?
I think you're right. I think it is because it has to mean a change of habits. And until you have experienced something else, you think what you are experiencing is probably safer to keep. Maybe this comes also from evolution, where if we know a safe habit that we have, something that kept us safe so far, we are a bit reluctant to change it. So the reluctance to change just in general, not really necessarily related to light. What has worked is sometimes to either force, or even better, to have a few early adopters with a pilot, where you just test without bothering all the ones that are most reluctant, but those who say, well, why not, I can try. And then to see what the effect on that is. Or I mean, if we take a Copenhagen example, the New Haven area, which was a parking lot, and where there was a huge uproar when it was decided to maybe remove the cars, it's because they were used to it, and they didn't know that it could work as a place without cars, and it does, obviously. So it's this fear of the unknown, probably, and for the blinds, actually, it's the same. Is that okay? Now that they are down, at least I know that I can control my environment, and I just get my lights on, and I'm okay. I can work. But so I guess both have to come hand in hand. The raising of awareness that this is important and actually matters. So this is the educational aspect. And on the other side, the implementing a change that might be acceptable and finding a way to make it acceptable, either iteratively or through information, or sometimes through authority if you really need to. But that's
sad. That's sad. And I was just going to ask, in terms of all of this knowledge that is relatively recently acquired in terms of the importance of daylight, bringing the role of the architect and kind of now bringing in the topic of education, do you think that the architects are trained and educated in a way in which they are aware of that importance of daylight and how to design architecture with the respect and awareness of daylight and its importance?
I think it depends a lot on the school they attend. So some have strong programs in this area, some others don't. It depends a lot on the faculty that are part of those institutions. We give, I would say, 2 classes that have a strong focus on light and daylight, on visual comfort on one side with other aspects of comfort, and another class that is more to actually raise awareness on the combination of daylight with other things when it comes to thinking about a building. And I think we have to train the architects to know, to be aware of these aspects first, and also to have enough, or to be equipped enough technically, not to know exactly what to do and how much light and with what means and all that, but enough to be able to talk with someone who does have that knowledge, and also to have a critical perspective on what that other person says. If the architect is clueless about these aspects because he or she just didn't have the opportunity to study that, and then through their experience they still haven't been exposed to that, it's likely that the guidance they get will be taken at face value, which, well, if they have a great consultant, this might work. But it's also important that there is a dialogue, because the design intent and the many things that make a great piece of architecture all are related, interrelated, and are especially related with light and daylight. You cannot dissociate them. So it's very important that then it becomes a teamwork. And for a team, both have to understand the other's perspective and therefore be equipped enough to work together. So I think, I mean, what I strive anyway in for EPFL students, those who happen to take our classes, is to equip them with that kind of tools, not tools in the literal sense, but the ways to know enough about it to both care, and then be able to engage in a dialogue, in a constructive dialogue and an informed dialogue with other people that together will form the team that will lead the design process.
And I think you're absolutely right in also highlighting the need for teamwork, in that the building comprises of so many various facets that are based on this very profound expert knowledge. But just going, having said that, to you, what does the perfect building with regards to daylight, what does that look like?
Well, I think it would be the building that best accounts for the environment it is in. So there is no one design that will be a good one. It's a combination of what the building is meant to serve as a function and where it is located, both in terms of the natural surroundings and views, the climate, the access to the sky, the obstruction to it, the urban implantation and how you do access. So all of these matter. Every project is different, and therefore there is no one fits all for daylight. However, what does always matter is that the occupants of that building can do what they are supposed to do in a comfortable, enjoyable, healthy, pleasant way. And this is where expertise in daylight or interest in it matters, because it's, even though you have to reinvent the wheel every time, the notion that you are doing all this for the future occupants of this space for which you work, otherwise it's better not to build any building, is really key. And therefore, very simple things like the depth of these spaces, the height of the windows, the combination between zenithal openings and lateral, so top lighting from the roof and from the sides, the materials you use, the partitioning you choose, all of these start to matter. Also in terms of getting naturally people to use the building in a way that is good for them. That would be the ultimate achievement of a good daylighting design, is that it feels natural to use it in a way that will be good for you.
I was just about to ask you what would be your hope for the future, and I think you've literally just answered it with those last sentences, because I think that was describing very beautifully what a building can do for people at its best. Thank you so very much, and I hope I'll see you next year at the Build for Life conference.
Yes, it will be even better.
Yes, very much so. But I think you're absolutely brilliant. It was really inspiring to talk to you.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to have the discussion together. Thank you, Pranina.